The rain pounded against the windshield as Charles Evans drove through the dark streets toward his estate. The storm had come suddenly, turning the evening into a wild display of lightning and thunder. Charles gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind still occupied with the business meeting he had just left. Numbers, contracts, and deals filled his thoughts, leaving little room for anything else. Charles was a billionaire, a man who had built his fortune from nothing. He owned hotels, restaurants, and real estate across the country. People knew his name, respected his success, and feared his sharp business mind. But tonight, as the rain soaked the world around him, Charles felt strangely alone. His estate appeared in the distance. A massive property surrounded by tall iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. The main house stood like a castle with dozens of rooms, marble floors, and expensive artwork on every wall. Charles had everything money could buy. Yet he rarely noticed the beauty of his own home anymore. As he pulled through the gates, his headlights swept across the driveway. Something caught his eye near the side entrance. A small figure huddled against the wall. Charles slowed the car, squinting through the rain-streaked glass. At first, he thought it might be an animal seeking shelter, but as he got closer, he realized it was a person. Charles parked quickly and stepped out into the storm. The cold rain immediately soaked through his expensive suit, but he didn't care. He rushed toward the figure, his heart pounding with concern as he approached. He recognized her. It was Louise, one of the housemaids. Louise was curled up under a small overhang, her thin uniform completely drenched. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and her body shook violently from the cold. She looked exhausted, her eyes half closed. Barely aware of her surroundings, Louise, Charles called out, his voice cutting through the sound of the storm. "What are you doing out here?" Louise's eyes opened slowly. She looked up at Charles with surprise and fear. Struggling to stand, she nearly collapsed. But Charles caught her arm, steadying her. "I'm sorry, sir," Louise said weakly, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. The guest house lost power during the storm. I didn't want to bother anyone, so I waited here." Charles stared at her in disbelief. "You've been out here in this storm. Why didn't you knock on the door? Why didn't you ask for help?" Louise looked down. "Ashamed, I thought everyone was asleep. I didn't want to disturb anyone. I'm just a maid, sir. I didn't think it was my place." Charles felt a wave of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Compassion. Here was a young woman, someone who worked in his home, who felt so insignificant that she would rather suffer in a storm than ask for help. It troubled him deeply. "Come with me," Charles said firmly. "You're not staying out here another second." He wrapped his coat around Louise's shoulders and guided her toward the main house. She protested weakly, insisting she would be fine. But Charles wouldn't hear it. He opened the door and led her inside, away from the rain and cold. The warmth of the house hit them immediately. Louise stood shivering in the grand entryway, water dripping onto the marble floor. She looked small and fragile, completely out of place in the luxurious surroundings. Charles called for his housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, an older woman who had worked for him for many years. She appeared quickly, her eyes widening when she saw Louise's condition. "Mrs. Patterson, please bring blankets and hot tea immediately," Charles ordered, "and prepare one of the guest rooms upstairs. Louise will be staying in the main house tonight, Mrs." Patterson nodded and hurried away. Louise tried to protest again. "Sir, that's not necessary. I can go back to the guest house once the power returns." "Absolutely not," Charles said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will stay here where it's safe and warm." "That's final." Louise nodded quietly. Tears forming in her eyes, she whispered, "Thank you." Sir Charles looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since she had started working for him. He realized he knew almost nothing about her. Her story, her struggles, or her dreams. She was just another face among the many people who kept his life running smoothly, invisible and unnoticed. But tonight, something had changed. Tonight, Charles saw Louise not as a maid, but as a human being deserving of dignity and care as Mrs. Patterson returned with blankets and wrapped them around Louise. Charles made a silent promise to himself. He would do better, he would be better. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside something new was beginning, something that would change both of their lives forever. Louise sat in the guest room wrapped in thick blankets, holding a cup of hot tea between her trembling hands. The room was more beautiful than any place she had ever stayed. The bed was huge, covered in silk sheets. and the walls were decorated with paintings that probably cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. She felt completely out of place. Mrs. Patterson had left her alone to rest. But Louise couldn't sleep, her mind raced with worry. She was grateful for Mr. Evans' kindness, but she also feared what tomorrow would bring. Would the other staff members gossip about her? Would Mr. Evans regret helping her and decide she was too much trouble? Louise had learned long ago not to expect kindness from wealthy people. Her life had taught her that lesson again and again. She grew up in a small town in Mississippi, the youngest of 5 children. Her parents worked multiple jobs just to put food on the table. But it was never enough. By the time Louise turned 16, she knew she had to leave home to ease the burden on her family. She moved to the city with nothing but a small suitcase and $40 in her pocket. Finding work wasn't easy. People looked at her and saw only what they wanted to see. A poor black girl with no education and no connections. She cleaned offices at night, washed dishes in restaurants, and did whatever jobs others refused to do. For years, Louise survived, but she never truly lived. She sent money home to her family whenever she could, often going without meals herself to make sure her younger siblings had what they needed. She dreamed of something better, of going to school, of becoming a nurse or a teacher, but those dreams seemed impossible. Then 2 months ago, Louise saw an advertisement for a housemaid position at the Evans estate. The pay was better than anything she had ever earned, and the job included housing in a guest house on the property. She applied immediately, not really believing she would get it. To her surprise, she was hired after a brief interview with Mrs. Patterson. Louise suspected she got the job because she was willing to work for less than other candidates. But she didn't care, it was an opportunity, and she grabbed it with both hands. Working at the estate was different from her previous jobs. The house was enormous, and keeping it clean required long hours and hard work. But Louise didn't mind, she was used to working hard. What bothered her was the loneliness. The other staff members were polite but distant. They had worked together for years and had their own friendships and routines. Louise was the outsider, the new girl who didn't quite fit in. She ate her meals alone, spent her free time alone, and went to bed alone in the small guest house behind the main property. Mr. Evans rarely spoke to her, in fact, before tonight. He had probably said fewer than 10 words to her total. He was always busy, always on his phone, always rushing somewhere important, Louise understood. She was just part of the machinery that kept his life running smoothly. Invisible and replaceable. That's why she hadn't knocked on the door during the storm. In Louise's experience, people like Mr. Evans didn't want to be bothered by people like her. They wanted their homes clean, their meals prepared, and their lives undisturbed. Asking for help felt like overstepping an invisible line. But tonight something unexpected happened. Mr. Evans had seen her, really seen her. He hadn't yelled or acted annoyed, instead he showed her kindness. Genuine kindness that asked for nothing in return. Louise didn't know what to make of it. As she sat in the luxurious guest room, Louise thought about her mother. She remembered how her mother used to say, "Baby, kindness is rare, but when you find it, hold on to it. It means something." Louise hadn't understood those words as a child, but now as an adult who had seen both cruelty and indifference, she understood perfectly. She finished her tea and set the cup on the nightstand. Her clothes had been taken away to be washed and dried, and Mrs. Patterson had left her a soft nightgown to wear. Louise changed quickly and climbed into the massive bed. The sheets felt like clouds against her skin. She had never experienced such comfort. Part of her felt guilty for enjoying it, as if she didn't deserve such luxury. But exhaustion won over guilt, and within minutes, Louise drifted into a deep sleep. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder shook the windows, but inside the main house, Louise slept peacefully for the first time in months. She didn't know it yet, but tonight marked the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest transformations. Sometimes, one person seeing another person's humanity is enough to shift the entire world. For Louise and Charles Evans, tonight was that moment. A moment that neither of them would ever forget. Charles woke up earlier than usual. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a clear, crisp morning. Sunlight streamed through his bedroom windows. But his mind wasn't on the beautiful weather. He kept thinking about Louise, the young woman he had found shivering in the rain. He had lived in this mansion for 15 years, surrounded by staff members who kept everything running perfectly, yet until last night, he had never really thought about their lives, their struggles or their stories. They were simply there, doing their jobs, fading into the background of his busy existence. Charles got dressed and headed downstairs to his office. He had emails to answer and calls to make, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept wandering back to what Louise had said. "I'm just a maid, sir. I didn't think it was my place." Those words haunted him. Had he created an environment where people felt too insignificant to ask for help? Had his pursuit of success made him blind to the humanity of those around him? These questions troubled Charles deeply. Around 8 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson knocked on his office door. "Good morning, sir," she said. "Breakfast is ready also. Louise is awake. She asked if she could speak with you before returning to work." "Tell her to meet me in the breakfast room," Charles replied. "And Mrs. Patterson, please join us. I'd like to discuss something important." Minutes later, Charles sat at the long dining table. Louise entered the room nervously. She had changed back into her clean uniform, and her hair was neatly tied back. She looked rested but still cautious. "Unsure of what to expect, please." "Sit down," Charles said, gesturing to a chair. "Have you eaten breakfast?" "No, sir," Louise answered quietly. "I didn't want to assume." "Well, you're eating now," Charles said firmly. He signaled to the kitchen staff, and soon plates of eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and coffee appeared on the table. Louise sat down slowly, clearly uncomfortable. She had never eaten in the main dining room before. This was where Mr. Evans entertained important guests and business partners. Not where maids belonged. Mrs. Patterson joined them. Looking equally puzzled by the unusual situation, Charles rarely deviated from his routines. "And this breakfast meeting was completely out of character, Louise," Charles began. "I want to apologize to you." Louise's eyes widened in shock. "Apologize, sir, for what? You saved me last night." "You showed me incredible kindness. That's exactly the point," Charles continued. "You shouldn't have been out in that storm in the first place. The fact that you felt you couldn't ask for help, that you thought you were too insignificant to knock on a door, that tells me I failed as an employer, sir." "You haven't failed," Louise protested. "I made that choice. You've always been fair." "Fair isn't enough," Charles said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I've been distant, disconnected from the people who work in my home. I know your name, but I don't know anything about you. Your family, your dreams, your challenges, that's not acceptable." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. "Mr. Evans, if I may say something," Charles nodded. And she continued, "You're a good employer. You pay well, you provide benefits, and you've never been cruel or unkind, but you're also very busy. We understand that. Being busy isn't an excuse for being blind," Charles replied. "Last night opened my eyes. I realized that I've been so focused on building my empire that I've forgotten about the people who make it possible." He turned to Louise. "Tell me about yourself. Where are you from? What brought you here? What do you want from life?" Louise hesitated, unused to such direct attention, but slowly, she began to share her story. She talked about growing up poor in Mississippi, about leaving home to support her family, about working multiple jobs just to survive. She spoke about her dreams of going to school someday, of becoming someone who could help others. Charles listened intently. He felt ashamed that he had employed this remarkable young woman for 2 months without knowing any of this. Louise had resilience, intelligence, and determination, qualities he valued in business. Yet he had completely overlooked them in someone working in his own home. "How old are you, Louise?" Charles asked. 23, sir," she answered. 23, Charles repeated, shaking his head. "You're so young, yet you've already sacrificed so much for your family. That's admirable." Louise looked down at her plate. "I just do what needs to be done, sir, same as anyone would." "No," Charles said firmly. "Not everyone would. You have something special. Louise, you have character, and I want to help you achieve your dreams." Louise looked up sharply, confusion and hope mixed in her expression. "Help me, sir, I don't understand." Charles smiled. "You will," he said. "Starting today, things are going to change around here. For you, and for everyone who works in this house, I've been building a business empire. But I forgot to build a community that ends now, Mrs. Patterson and Louise exchanged glances, neither quite understanding what Mr. Evans meant. But they could see something had shifted in him, something fundamental. The billionaire who rarely noticed the people around him had finally woken up. 3 days had passed since the storm. and the atmosphere in the Evans estate had shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. Charles had started greeting staff members by name each morning, asking about their families and their well-being. At first, people were confused by the change, but slowly they began to respond with genuine warmth. Louise had returned to her regular duties, cleaning rooms and helping with household tasks. But she couldn't stop thinking about the breakfast conversation with Mr. Evans. He had said he wanted to help her achieve her dreams, but she didn't know what that meant. Rich people often made promises they didn't keep. And Louise had learned not to get her hopes up. On Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Patterson found Louise polishing silver in the kitchen. "Mr. Evans wants to see you in his office," she said. Her expression was unreadable, which made Louise nervous. "Did I do something wrong?" Louise asked, her heart racing. "No, dear, Mrs. Patterson replied with a small smile. "Just go. He's expecting you." Louise removed her apron, smoothed down her uniform, and walked through the long hallways to Mr. Evans' office. She had only been inside that room once before. On her first day of work, the heavy wooden door seemed intimidating, but she knocked gently. "Come in," Charles called from inside. Louise entered to find Charles sitting behind his massive desk. But he wasn't alone. A woman in a professional suit sat across from him, holding a folder. Both of them smiled when Louise walked in. "Louise, please sit down," Charles said, gesturing to an empty chair. "I want you to meet someone. This is Dr. Rebecca Martinez. She's the admissions director at Riverside Community College." Louise's breath caught in her throat. College. Why would Mr. Evans bring a college administrator to meet with her? Dr. Martinez extended her hand, and Louise shook it nervously. "It's nice to meet you." "Louise," the woman said warmly, "Mr. Evans has told me a lot about you." "I don't understand," Louise said, looking between them. "Why am I here?" Charles leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Louise, do you remember when you told me about your dream of going to school, of becoming a nurse or a teacher?" Louise nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that conversation ever since," Charles continued. "You have intelligence, dedication, and the kind of work ethic most people never develop. It would be a waste for someone like you not to pursue an education." "But, sir, I can't afford college," Louise said quickly. "I barely finished high school. I have no savings. And I need to send money to my family. It's just not possible for someone like me." "What if I told you it could be possible?" Charles replied. "What if I offered you a scholarship? Full tuition, books and supplies all covered. You could study whatever you want, nursing, education, business, anything that interests you." Louise stared at him in disbelief. "A scholarship, sir? I don't know what to say. That's too generous. I couldn't possibly accept." "Why not?" Charles asked. "You work hard. You deserve this opportunity." "Because I haven't earned it," Louise said, tears forming in her eyes. "I've only worked here for 2 months. You don't owe me anything. People will think I'm taking advantage of your kindness." Dr. Martinez spoke up gently. "Louise, Mr. Evans reached out to our college because he believes in investing in people. Not just businesses. He told me about your background, your sacrifices for your family, and your determination to keep working despite difficult circumstances. Those qualities tell me you've already earned this opportunity." Charles nodded. "I'm not offering you charity, Louise. I'm offering you an investment. When someone invests in the stock market, they look for potential, for something that will grow and provide returns. I see that potential in you." "But what about my job?" Louise asked. "What about the money I send home to my family if I go to school? I can't work full-time." "I've thought about that too," Charles said. "You'll continue living in the guest house, and you'll receive a monthly stipend equal to your current salary. In exchange, you'll help Mrs. Patterson with light duties on weekends. That way, you can focus on your studies while still supporting your family." Louise couldn't hold back her tears anymore. They streamed down her face as the reality of what was being offered began to sink in. This was the opportunity she had dreamed about for years, the chance to build a better life, to become someone who could help others, to make her parents proud. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this for me?" Charles was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because last week, I found you suffering in a storm and you didn't think you deserved to ask for help. That moment made me realize I've been living in my own storm, disconnected from people, focused only on money and success. You reminded me what really matters. Helping you isn't just about changing your life. Louise, it's about changing mine too, doctor. Martinez opened her folder and pulled out several papers. These are the enrollment forms, she explained. Classes start in 3 weeks if you're interested. We can begin the process today. Louise looked at the papers, then at Charles, then back at the papers. Her hands trembled as she reached forward. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I want to do this. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Thank you so much. Charles smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. You're welcome, Louise. Now let's get you enrolled. Your future starts today. Louise stood outside the main building of Riverside Community College, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. Students rushed past her, laughing and chatting with friends, carrying backpacks and coffee cups. They all seemed to belong here. While Louise felt like an imposter, she clutched her new backpack tightly, a gift from Mrs. Patterson, who had surprised her the night before. Inside were notebooks, pens, highlighters, and her class schedule. Louise had chosen to study nursing, a decision that felt both thrilling and terrifying. 3 weeks had passed since Mr. Evans made his incredible offer. Those weeks had been a whirlwind of paperwork, placement tests and preparation. Dr. Martinez had been patient and helpful, guiding Louise through every step of the enrollment process, but now, standing here alone on campus, Louise felt the weight of doubt pressing down on her. What if she wasn't smart enough? What if the other students were more educated and better prepared? What if she failed and disappointed Mr. Evans after everything he had done for her? You can do this, Louise whispered to herself. You didn't come this far to give up now. She took a deep breath and walked through the doors. Her first class was Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology, a required course for all nursing students. The classroom was already half full when she arrived. Louise chose a seat near the middle, not too close to the front but not hiding in the back either. As more students filed in, Louise noticed she was one of the oldest people in the room. Most of her classmates looked like they had just graduated from high school, fresh-faced and confident. A few gave her curious glances, but no one spoke to her. The professor arrived exactly on time, a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. Good morning, everyone, she said, her voice commanding immediate attention. I'm Professor Williams, and this is Anatomy and Physiology. I'll warn you right now. This class is difficult. Many of you will struggle. Some of you won't pass, but if you work hard and stay committed, you'll learn more than you ever thought possible. Louise felt her stomach twist with nervousness, but she opened her notebook and prepared to take notes. Professor Williams began the lecture. Discussing the human skeletal system, she spoke quickly, using terms Louise had never heard before. Around her, other students scribbled notes effortlessly, nodding along as if everything made perfect sense. Louise wrote frantically, trying to keep up, but she felt lost. When class ended 90 minutes later, Louise's hand ached from writing, and her head spun with information she didn't fully understand. Students packed up their belongings and left, chatting about lunch plans and weekend parties. Louise sat alone staring at her notes, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. First day, huh? A voice said beside her. Louise looked up to see a young woman with curly red hair and friendly eyes. She wore scrubs and carried a worn backpack covered in patches. Is it that obvious? Louise asked with a weak smile. Only because you have that terrified look I had on my first day. The woman laughed. I'm Rachel. I'm in my second semester of the nursing program. Louise, she replied, shaking Rachel's hand. And yes, I'm terrified. That class was so hard. I barely understood anything. Rachel sat down beside her. Can I give you some advice? Louise nodded eagerly. Everyone feels lost after their first anatomy class. Professor Williams moves fast, and she uses big words to intimidate people. But here's the secret. You don't have to understand everything the first time you hear it. That's what studying is for. But everyone else seemed to understand, Louise said. They didn't, Rachel assured her. They're just better at pretending, trust me. Half those students will be crying in the library by next week. She paused, then added, Look, nursing school is tough. It's designed to weed out people who aren't serious, but if you really want this, if you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked before, you can make it. Louise felt a spark of hope. I do want this, she said firmly. I want it more than anything. Then you're already halfway there, Rachel said. The ones who fail are the ones who give up. You don't seem like a quitter to me. I'm not, Louise replied, thinking about everything she had overcome to get here. I've worked too hard for this opportunity. I won't waste it, Rachel smiled. Good, listen. A group of us study together in the library every Tuesday and Thursday evening. You should join us. We help each other understand the material. And it makes everything less overwhelming. Really, Louise said, surprised by the invitation. You'd let me join your study group? Of course, Rachel said. We're all in this together. Nursing school isn't a competition. It's a team effort. For the first time that day, Louise felt like she might actually belong here. Thank you, she said sincerely. I'd love to join. Great, Rachel said, standing up and slinging her backpack over her shoulder. See you Tuesday at 6 in Louise, she added. Welcome to nursing school. You're going to do great. As Rachel walked away, Louise gathered her things slowly. The fear hadn't completely disappeared, but it had lessened. She had made a friend, found a study group, and survived her first class. Louise walked out of the building into the bright sunshine. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Mr. Evans. First day complete. Thank you for believing in me. His response came quickly. I knew you could do it. Keep going. Louise smiled and headed toward her next class. The journey was just beginning and she was ready. 4 months into her first semester, Louise had found her rhythm. She attended classes during the day, studied with Rachel's group twice a week, and helped Mrs. Patterson with light housework on weekends. Her grades were good, not perfect, but solid B's and a few A's. She was proving to herself and to Mr. Evans that his investment hadn't been wasted, but success came with exhaustion. Louise often studied until 2 in the morning, reviewing anatomy diagrams and memorizing medical terminology. She survived on coffee and determination, pushing herself harder than anyone else because she felt she had more to prove. One Tuesday evening, Louise sat in the library with her study group, preparing for their upcoming midterm exam. Rachel was quizzing them on the cardiovascular system, while 3 other students, Marcus, Jenny, and David, took turns answering. Okay, Louise, Rachel said. Describe the path blood takes through the heart. Louise closed her eyes, visualizing the diagram from her textbook. Blood enters through the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium, she began. Then it moves through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. From there it goes through the pulmonary valve to the lungs, returns oxygenated through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium, passes through the mitral valve to the left ventricle, and finally exits through the aortic valve into the aorta. Perfect, Rachel said, grinning. See, I told you that you'd get it, Louise smiled. But her smile faded when her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was her older sister, Maya. Louise excused herself from the table and stepped outside to answer. Maya, what's wrong? Louise asked immediately. Her sister never called unless something was urgent. It's Mama, Maya said, her voice thick with tears. She collapsed at work today. They took her to the hospital. The doctors say she had a stroke. Louise felt the world tilt beneath her feet. A stroke. Is she okay? Is she awake? She's stable now, but Louise... The medical bills are going to be enormous, Maya said. We don't have insurance that covers everything. The doctors say she'll need months of rehabilitation, maybe longer. We need help. Louise leaned against the cold brick wall, her mind racing. How much do you need? At least $5,000 just to start, Maya replied. Maybe more. I don't know what to do. We've already borrowed from everyone we know. $5,000. Louise felt sick. She had been sending money home every month from her stipend, but she had never saved that much. Most of her earnings went toward her family's daily expenses and her younger siblings' school supplies. I'll figure something out, Louise promised. Tell Mama I love her. I'll call you tomorrow. She hung up and stood there in the cold night air, trying not to cry. Her mother, the woman who had worked 3 jobs to feed her children, who had sacrificed everything, was now lying in a hospital bed, and Louise felt helpless. She couldn't ask Mr. Evans for more money. He had already done so much, and she didn't want him to think she was taking advantage of his generosity. But what other choice did she have? Louise returned to the library, grabbed her things, and told Rachel she had to leave. She didn't explain why. She couldn't speak without breaking down. The drive back to the Evans estate felt longer than usual. Louise's mind spun with impossible calculations, trying to figure out how to save money she didn't have. By the time she reached the guest house, she had made a decision, a painful one, but necessary. She would have to drop out of school, get a full-time job, and work as many hours as possible to help pay for her mother's medical care. Her dream of becoming a nurse would have to wait. Maybe forever, but family came first. It always had. Louise spent the night filling out withdrawal forms online, tears streaming down her face as she typed. She had worked so hard, learned so much, and made real friends for the first time in years. Leaving felt like ripping her heart out. But she had no choice. The next morning, Louise went to the main house to tell Mrs. Patterson she needed to speak with Mr. Evans. She had to explain why she was quitting school and ask if she could return to full-time work as a maid. Mrs. Patterson took one look at Louise's red, swollen eyes and pulled her into a hug. What happened? Dear, Louise broke down and told her everything. About her mother's stroke, the medical bills, and her decision to leave school. Mrs. Patterson listened quietly, holding Louise's hands. You haven't told Mr. Evans yet? Mrs. Patterson asked. No, Louise whispered. I'm afraid to. He believed in me, and I'm letting him down. You're not letting anyone down, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. You're doing what family does, taking care of each other. But Louise, before you make any final decisions, you need to talk to Mr. Evans. He deserves to know what's happening. Louise nodded reluctantly. Can you ask him if he has time to see me today? He's in his office now, Mrs. Patterson said. Come on. I'll walk with you. As they walked through the grand hallways toward Charles Evans' office, Louise felt like she was walking toward the end of everything she had hoped for. But she held her head high. She had nothing to be ashamed of. She was choosing love over ambition, and that was something her mother had taught her to value above all else. Louise sat across from Charles in his office, her hands trembling in her lap. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say during the walkover, but now that she was here, the words felt stuck in her throat. Louise, Mrs. Patterson said you needed to speak with me urgently, Charles said, concern evident in his voice. What's wrong? Louise took a shaky breath. Mr. Evans, I need to withdraw from school, she said, forcing the words out. My mother had a stroke. She's in the hospital, and the medical bills are more than my family can handle. I need to get a full-time job to help pay for her treatment. Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I'm very sorry about your mother, he said quietly. That must be incredibly difficult for you and your family. Thank you, sir, Louise replied, tears threatening to spill over. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, the scholarship, the stipend, the opportunity. It all meant the world to me, but I can't continue when my mother needs help. I hope you understand. How much are the medical bills? Charles asked. Louise hesitated. At least $5,000 to start. Probably more as her treatment continues. I know that's a lot of money. I don't expect you to help with this. You've already done so much. I just wanted to explain why I have to leave school. Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring at his desk. When he finally looked up, there was something fierce in his eyes, determination mixed with purpose. No, he said simply. Louise blinked in confusion. No. You're not dropping out of school, Charles said firmly. And no, you're not facing this alone. But sir, I can't ask you for more money, Louise protested. That wouldn't be right. You're not asking, Charles replied. I'm offering more than that, I'm insisting. He picked up his phone and pressed a button. Mrs. Patterson, please come to my office. And call Dr. Harrison. Tell him I need to speak with him immediately about a patient transfer. Louise felt dizzy with confusion. Patient transfer, I don't understand. Charles stood up and walked around his desk, sitting in the chair next to Louise instead of across from her. Listen to me carefully, he said, his voice gentle but firm. 4 months ago, you taught me an important lesson. You showed me that people matter more than profits. That kindness costs nothing but means everything. Now it's my turn to show you something, Mrs. Patterson entered the office and Charles continued. Real community means we take care of each other. Especially during hard times, your mother needs medical care. And you need to stay in school. We're going to make both things happen. I don't deserve this, Louise whispered. I'm nobody, just a maid who got lucky. Stop, Charles said, his tone sharp. You are not just anything. You're a nursing student with a bright future. You're a daughter who loves her family. You're a person who works harder than anyone I've ever met. And most importantly, you're part of this household. Which means you're part of this family, Mrs. Patterson nodded, tears in her own eyes. He's right, Louise. We take care of our own. Charles pulled out his phone again. Dr. Harrison is one of the best neurologists in the state, and he owes me several favors. I'm arranging for your mother to be transferred to his care at University Hospital. Her treatment will be covered completely, including rehabilitation. Louise couldn't hold back her tears anymore. Why? She sobbed. Why would you do all this for me? Because you would do the same if our positions were reversed, Charles said simply. Because that's what decent people do, they help each other. And because watching you fight so hard for your education has reminded me what really matters in life. He stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out his checkbook. I'm also writing a check for $10,000, he continued. $5,000 for immediate expenses and $5,000 as a cushion for whatever else your family needs. Your mother shouldn't have to worry about money while she's recovering. Mr. Evans, I can't, Louise tried to say. But Charles held up his hand. Yes, you can, he said. And you will. Because someday, when you're a successful nurse helping other people, you'll pay this forward. You'll help someone else who's struggling. Someone who feels invisible and unimportant. That's how kindness works, Louise. It doesn't end with one person. It spreads. Louise stood up on shaky legs and hugged Charles. Something she never thought she would do. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Charles hugged her back. Something he never thought he would do either. You're welcome, he said. Now, no more talk about dropping out. You have midterms coming up. And I expect you to pass them all? Mrs. Patterson smiled through her tears. I'll start making arrangements for Louise's mother, she said. As Louise left the office, she felt like she was floating. The weight that had crushed her chest for the past 24 hours had lifted. Her mother would get the care she needed, and Louise could continue pursuing her dreams. But more than that, she had learned something profound. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found a community, a family that chose to stand beside her. And that gift was worth more than any amount of money. Sometimes miracles don't come from the sky. They come from human hearts choosing compassion over indifference. And sometimes the people we least expect become the family we need most. 2 years had passed since that stormy night when Charles Evans found Louise shivering outside his mansion. The scared young woman who once felt invisible had transformed into someone confident and capable. Louise was now in her final semester of nursing school, preparing to graduate with honors. Her mother had made a full recovery thanks to Dr. Harrison's expert care and months of intensive rehabilitation. She now lived with Louise's sister Maya, in a small but comfortable house that Charles had helped them purchase. The family's financial struggles had eased, and for the first time in their lives, they could breathe without the constant weight of poverty crushing them. Louise stood in the Evans estate kitchen, but this time not as a maid. She was there as a guest, preparing for a celebration that Charles had insisted on hosting. It was graduation week, and Charles wanted to honor Louise's achievement with a dinner party. Mrs. Patterson bustled around the kitchen, directing the catering staff. You should be resting, dear, she told Louise. You're the guest of honor tonight, not the help. Old habits, Louise said with a laugh. Besides, I like being useful. The doorbell rang, and soon the house filled with guests. Rachel and the entire nursing study group arrived, along with several professors from Riverside Community College. Dr. Martinez came, beaming with pride. Louise's mother and siblings drove up from Mississippi, dressed in their finest clothes. But the most surprising guest was James Crawford. A reporter from the local newspaper, Charles had contacted him weeks earlier, wanting to share Louise's story with the community. As everyone gathered in the grand dining room, Charles stood at the head of the table and raised his glass. Thank you all for coming, he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. We're here tonight to celebrate someone extraordinary, someone who has taught me more about courage, determination, and character than any business degree ever could. Louise felt her cheeks flush as everyone turned to look at her. 2 years ago, I found Louise sleeping outside during a storm, Charles continued. She was cold, exhausted, and convinced she didn't deserve to ask for help. That moment changed both of our lives. I learned that success isn't measured by the money you make or the empire you build. It's measured by the lives you touch and the people you help along the way. He looked directly at Louise. You came into my home as a maid, but you became my teacher. You showed me what real strength looks like. It's not about power or wealth. It's about getting back up every time life knocks you down. It's about sacrificing for the people you love. It's about working harder than everyone else because you refuse to give up on your dreams. Tears streamed down Louise's face as Charles spoke. This week, Louise graduates from nursing school with a 3.8 GPA, Charles said. She's already been offered a position at University Hospital in their emergency department. But more importantly, she's become an inspiration to everyone who knows her story. He turned to James Crawford. That's why I invited the press tonight. Not to praise myself, but to share Louise's journey. Because somewhere out there, someone is struggling. Someone feels invisible and unimportant. Someone needs to know that their circumstances don't define their potential. Louise stood up, her legs shaking slightly. Mr. Evans, Mrs. Patterson, everyone here tonight. I don't have fancy words or prepared speeches, she began. But I want you to know that 2 years ago I was ready to give up. I thought my life would always be about surviving. Never truly living, she looked at Charles. You didn't just give me money or an education. You gave me something more valuable. You saw me as a person, not just a worker. You treated me with dignity when I felt worthless. That gift changed everything. Louise turned to address the entire room. I learned that kindness isn't weakness. It's the most powerful force in the world. One act of compassion can change someone's entire life trajectory. Mr. Evans helped me, and now I get to spend my career helping others. That's what I call a legacy. Her mother stood up, crying, and hugged Louise tightly. Soon everyone was standing, applauding, celebrating not just Louise's graduation, but the power of human connection. James Crawford scribbled notes frantically, already composing the headline in his mind. From Maid to Nurse, a story of compassion and transformation. As the evening continued with dinner, laughter, and shared stories, Charles pulled Louise aside. I have one more surprise, he said, handing her an envelope. Louise opened it to find a job offer letter, but not from University Hospital. It was from the Evans Foundation, a new nonprofit organization. I'm starting a scholarship fund, Charles explained. For people like you, people who have potential but lack opportunity. I want you to be on the board of directors, to help identify deserving candidates and guide them through their educational journeys. Louise read the letter, stunned. You want me to help run your foundation? I want you to help change lives, Charles corrected. Just like you changed mine, Louise hugged him. I'd be honored. That night, as guests departed and the house grew quiet, Louise stood on the same spot where Charles had found her 2 years earlier. The sky was clear now, filled with stars. She thought about how far she had come, from a frightened maid sleeping in a storm to a soon-to-be nurse with a purpose. Sometimes the darkest storms lead to the brightest mornings, and sometimes one person's compassion creates ripples that touch countless lives. Louise's journey was proof that transformation is possible, that dignity matters, and that kindness always wins.